Hello, and welcome to this presentation on lawns and lakes. There is a connection. There is a clear connection between the way we manage our lawns and the water quality of our lakes. With a little bit of planning, you can change your yard's landscape to help protect your lake. Itasca Waters is working hard to give people the tools that they need to make these changes. In addition to raising awareness, like with this billboard, they also offer services such as their Shoreland Advisors Program, their Shoreland Guide to Lake Stewardship, and the Itasca Waters website. We know that, compared to the rest of the state, Itasca County and Northeast Minnesota have high-quality lakes. The map here in the upper right shows water clarity using 2015 satellite imagery. The darker blue the lake on the map, the better the water clarity. So we know that water clarity is good, fishing is exceptional, and recreational opportunities seem to be endless. So it's important to protect what we have and not let it become degraded. We can think of our properties in terms of 5 areas of concern: trees, septic systems, erosion and runoff, shoreland, which is where the water meets the land, and the lake itself. We reap the benefits of living on and near these lakes, and along with that, we also have a responsibility to do our part to make sure that they stay healthy. Have you ever used a garden hose to wash leaves or dirt or gravel off of your patio or driveway? The force of the water allows you to move the unwanted debris wherever you want. Rain does the same thing, although without any discretion. Raindrops have the ability to pick up whatever small particles are in their path, such as the dirt and leaves, lawn fertilizer and pesticides, animal waste, road salt, and it carries those pollutants downhill until they reach a lake or a river or a stream. So we need to be concerned about what's in that moving water. Ecosystems such as lakes are constantly adjusting to be in balance. If one variable is changed, the rest of the system needs to adjust to reach equilibrium. Phosphorus is typically the limiting factor in our lakes that keeps algae in balance, meaning that if we add excess phosphorus, we upset the balance, allowing algae to readily grow and create unpleasant conditions. There are several human-made sources of phosphorus that we can control, such as erosion, which allows soil to get into the water, fertilizer from lawns and farms, human and animal waste, and detergents. Now think about your own shoreline property. Where does the water flow and what does it pick up in its path? The best way to protect our lakes is to minimize how much water reaches the lake and the pollutants that it picks up along the way. The best way to see how the water moves across your personal landscape, your yard, is to go outside when it's raining and look around. Pay attention to the rain that flows off of your impervious surfaces like roofs and driveways and hard surface paths. Any surface that the water can't soak into is an impervious surface. Also notice where your downspouts are and where the water flows across your lawn toward the lake. And pay attention to what's in the path of that flowing water. There may be bad things like pet waste or eroding gullies, and there may be good things like tall, thick vegetation that will slow the water down, or recessed areas where water can pond up and soak into the ground. Once you've identified where the water moves across your landscape, think about how you might be able to slow the flow to minimize how much water and pollution washes into the lake. We do this often with 3 different practices: rain gardens, rain barrels, and shoreline buffers. Rain gardens are simply gardens that are recessed into the ground, just dug a little bit below the surface of the ground to capture runoff and let it soak into the ground below. Look for places in your yard where you can intercept the flow of the water from hard surfaces like the roofs and driveways. Rain gardens should be designed to be dry within 1 to 2 days, so don't put one in a wet area. If the ground beneath the rain garden is already saturated, then it won't be able to absorb the runoff. So rain barrels were important to our grandparents and our great-grandparents because they used the captured water for their everyday needs. They needed that water. For us, rain barrels are a way to capture the water coming from our downspouts to prevent it from flowing into the lake. The water from the rain barrels can then be released slowly after the rain, so you can use it to water your plants or your lawn. Shoreline buffers are areas where vegetation is planted along the lakeshore. Runoff from the home and the yard flows into the buffer, and the vegetation there slows that water down and allows it time to soak into the ground. The plants can take up some of the water, and the plants and the soil together filter out pollutants, preventing them from reaching the lake. These are two before and after photos of a shoreline buffer. Because of the elevation of this particular site, the landowners have been able to maintain their view of the lake over some pretty tall plants. Also note that there's a path on the left-hand side. The homeowner has kept their access to their dock. Very few property owners want to convert their entire lakefront to a buffer. It's important to consider how each landowner uses their individual property, what's important to them, and then plan accordingly. It never has to be an all or nothing decision. Buffers can cover just a portion of your shoreline. Imagine runoff coming off of the house and the lawn and flowing toward the lake. Look at the before scenario. There's really not much to stop that water or slow it down. The vegetation in the after scenario not only slows down the runoff, but the plant's roots create pores in the soil for the water to soak into. This example is a much steeper site. The landowners didn't like mowing that hillside because it is so steep and it's not really usable for any other activities. So they planted it to beautiful native plants. Once a planting like this gets established, it requires very little maintenance. The property owners in this example combined a shoreline buffer and a rain garden to first capture the runoff in the rain garden, and then anything that flows around or overflows the rain garden goes through the shoreland buffer. So everything gets filtered. What you can't see in these photos is that they also maintained access to their dock and a swimming area off to the right. Shoreline erosion from wave action is very common, and it can contribute a lot of soil and phosphorus to the lake. Often this type of erosion can be tied to the conversion of a natural shoreline to typical lawn grass, which does not have enough root structure to resist the erosive action of the waves. In this example, native plants were returned to the shoreline. If you look really closely in the picture on the right, you can see some long cylindrical rolls where the water meets the shore. And these are cocoa fiber logs that are installed as a temporary measure to hold the shoreline in place while the plants are taking root. Eventually, that will disintegrate and the plants will take over that job. It's also important to pay attention to what's going on in the water near shore, the littoral zone. This zone is typically defined as the area where sunlight reaches the bottom of the lake, generally about a maximum of 15 feet deep. And that allows vegetation to grow in that area. This vegetation can help protect the shoreline from erosion, and it's an important part of the aquatic ecosystem. Some fish species spawn in this zone, and many aquatic invertebrates, which eventually become food for the fish, depend on these areas for reproduction. Boat motors can damage those plants in the littoral zone, and they can do it by two ways: directly damaging the plants with the prop, or by churning up the sediment and uprooting the plants. Some shoreline restoration projects include planting aquatic vegetation near the shoreline, but it's important to note that anytime you're doing any work below the ordinary high water mark on your lake, you should contact the DNR first. I've mentioned native plants a few times, so I should probably explain what I mean by that. Native plants are those plant species that were here before European settlers arrived. Nowadays, there are many cultivars of native plants. Think about black-eyed Susan and blazing star and coneflowers, but those cultivars are not technically the same as true natives. There are growers who specialize in growing true native plants, which are acclimated to our harsh winters. Those plants do a great job of slowing the flow of the runoff and filtering out the bad stuff when we plant them in our rain gardens and shoreline buffers. Their extensive root systems that you can see in this graphic also help bind the soil together at the water's edge, deterring erosion. Notice in this graphic the middle plant is Kentucky bluegrass, which is a very common lawn species. The roots on the Kentucky bluegrass are so short that they're not helping hold the soil in place. The native plants, including grasses and flowers, have deeper, denser root systems. Native plants are also an important part of the biodiversity connected to our lake ecosystems. Biodiversity is just a mashup of two words, biological and diversity, and it is the combination of all of the living things in a particular natural community, like your shoreline. When we plant a variety of native species, we contribute to biodiversity, and in doing so, we create islands of habitat for pollinators, birds, and other wildlife. So think about how your relatively small planting would work in concert with your neighbor's small planting, and those plantings on the next lake over and the next county over. These islands of habitat add up to something significant that make a difference for the wildlife that live near our lakes. But the pollinators and other wildlife depend on the true native species. Cultivars often don't provide what those wildlife species need. And don't overlook the importance of trees and shrubs in minimizing runoff. Raindrops that land on the leaves and the branches of trees are intercepted before they ever reach the ground. So the branches and the leaves on the trees hold that water and really help us to further our quest of slowing the flow. We hear a lot about aquatic invasive species, or AIS. What are they and why are they such a big deal? Invasive species are those that are not native. They were brought here intentionally or accidentally, and many of them outcompete our native species because the invaders don't have any predators to keep them in check. Examples are Eurasian water milfoil, zebra mussels, reed canary grass, curly leaf pondweed, and spiny water flea. Remember the importance of balance in an ecosystem. Invasive species disrupt that balance. Your role in minimizing the spread of AIS, or aquatic invasive species, is to follow the rule. If you take your boat to a different lake, make sure that you follow the rules when you come back to your lake. Make sure you do the clean, drain, and dry routine so that you are not spreading aquatic invasive species. When you pull your boat out of the lake or you pull your dock out, make sure that you remove all of the vegetation from your boat and motor and trailer and dock. And also be vigilant on your own lakeshore. Watch for things like zebra mussels and reed canary grass and take action to keep them from spreading. Not only are aquatic invasive species bad for the lake ecosystem, they're also bad for property values. When lakes get infested with invasive species, property values decline. And lastly, most lake homes depend on individual septic systems for wastewater treatment. If these systems are not functioning properly, they can leak into the lake, adding phosphorus, nitrogen, pharmaceuticals, and other nasty chemicals. Learn how your septic system works and make a commitment to manage it responsibly. In summary, our lakes overall are in really great shape, and we need to do what we can to protect them. Runoff from rain and snowmelt can pick up pollution and carry it to our lakes and rivers, so we need to slow the flow wherever we can. Native plants provide many benefits, even beyond better water quality, so we should use them in our rain gardens, shoreline buffers, and other garden spaces. An additional benefit is that you'll be doing less mowing. Also, make sure that your septic system is working properly and that you clean up pet waste and dispose of it away from the lake. Each of us doing our part on our own property adds up to create a positive impact on our lake ecosystems.